hundreds upon thousands of podcasts that we would probably class as our favorites. Luckily, however, if you've come to this video to find your new favorite podcast, don't worry, we're not going to do all those thousands. We've narrowed it down to 10. Before we get started, I wanted to talk to you about the sponsor of this video, Radio.co. I've got a question for you. Have you ever dreamed of having your own radio station? Is there a genre of music or a conversation you think is criminally absent from the airwaves? Maybe you just noticed a gap in the market for a radio station based on tortoises? Well, our sister company, Radio.co, has the tools for you to do all of that and more. Even the tortoise thing. With its easy-to-use cloud-based platform, it's never been easier to automate a 24/7 schedule, broadcast live, and even track your listeners. Launch your radio station in minutes and broadcast to potentially thousands of listeners across the world. Sound good? Well, you can start today with a free 7-day trial using the link below. I don't hate it. Number 1. Anatomy of a Stalker. So, we all know by now that true crime, or just crime in general, is a huge genre in podcasting at the moment. Because of this, it's become a very oversaturated market, and pretty much everyone is out there currently trying to make a true crime podcast when really they don't have anything that great to tell. So if you're on the hunt for the next big thriller in your life, you may be wanting to go a bit more niche. Well, enter Anatomy of a Stalker. It's a new crime and investigation original podcast from our sister company, Q Originals. Like the title suggests, this is a podcast that focuses mostly on stalking and the terrifying nature of that crime. Journalist Ruchira Sharma presents a thought-provoking and sensitively handled informational podcast that really seeks to get inside the mind of a stalker. Ruchira seeks to answer questions on stalking by speaking to survivors, forensics, and even clinical psychologists, and just actually stalkers themselves. Strikingly, 4% of the UK population will experience stalking this year. Not just in general, this year. So this is terrifyingly relevant right now. Anatomy of a Stalker only recently launched, so if you're one of those that likes to brag to your friends that like, I was there when the podcast first came out, you don't know, you weren't there. Well, you can do that. Number 2, the Louis Theroux Podcast. Aside from like David Attenborough and Mr. Bean, there's not many British icons right now that we can all agree on that we love them. But Louis Theroux has sort of entered that small section of people. Louis is well known for his thought-provoking documentaries and sort of sly, dry humor when actually facing some pretty serious topics. He started in the podcasting sphere with a podcast named Grounded, which has now become the Louis Theroux Podcast. It's an interview-style podcast, so something Louis thrives in, and he gets all the big names such as Paul Mescal, and I can't think of another one, but that's pretty big. Are you not convinced? And if you're not a fan of these sort of fake TikTok-y interviews where they're just desperately trying to get a soundbite to put on social media, don't worry. These are very chilled out conversations where Louis just has a chat with someone. It's like they're best friends. They may have just met before, but it doesn't sound like it. Number 3, the rest is history. Okay, so I would give points to the rest is history because the name's cool, but I mean, if you just look at the podcast charts at the moment, I think I'm a bit sick of this joke. The rest is football. Shut up. Think of something new. I don't know why I got so angry about that. Anyway, The Rest is History is the most popular podcast in the world right now for history lovers. Hosted by Dominic Sambrook and Tom Holland. In each episode, they go through a different time in history with humor, but also a bit of seriousness, and dive into some sort of unknown facts you might not know about. With the hosts being historians themselves, then you better believe that it's going to be very well researched and full of insightful knowledge. They also post extremely regularly, like I think it's pretty much every couple of days, and they'll regularly do like a series. So recently they did a few episodes on the Titanic. I think they did like a 5-part thing on the Titanic, and then they'll move on to something else. So you might get one-off podcasts on just like World War II, or you might get a whole series on something you might not know much about. Number 4, 53 minutes. Those who like the football, listen up, because this one is about the football. Oy, oy. It's all about a story that's so wild, it's actually quite hard to believe it's true. The bizarre saga of Ali Dia, who bluffed his way into the Premier League for just 53 minutes. It's hosted by British comedians Josh Widdicombe and Dara O'Brien, so you know it's going to be funny. Each week they're joined by footballers, journalists, and fans who remember the singular game that shocked the footballing world to its core. I'll leave the spoilers at the door for this one, I won't say any more, but do check it out. Number 5, Dissect. Each episode within a season of the show thoroughly analyzes and breaks down every song from an album, giving you arguably the most comprehensive overview of artists, lyricism, and the technical side of music out there. So what this means is each season of the podcast is about one album. And then every episode of that podcast in that season is about a song in that album. So I know you're probably thinking, what if I don't know the album? What if I don't like the album? What if I just get a bit bored? And I mean, yeah, each episode is an hour long. So if maybe you don't like that particular album, it might be a bit confusing for you. But trust us, at least give it a go. Once you know the full composition and all the work and history that goes into making an album, it's still quite interesting to listen to, even if you don't like the artist in question. Number 6, 2 hot takes. So if you're inclined to a bit of tea, a bit of gossip, a bit of chit-chat, then this one's for you. 2 Hot Takes is a gloriously gossipy podcast that feels like you're listening to 2 friends have a chat. And in all honesty, it's perfect to pop on when you just need some sage advice on matters yourself, or if you're just nosy and want to see what other problems people have in the world. Morgan Absher and friends scour Reddit for the absolute creme de la creme of dating, relationship, life, and stories you probably wouldn't hear your nan tell you. Some of them are hilarious and bizarre, and some of them are more sincere and emotional. There's no other show quite like Radio Labs out there. The podcast calls itself an experimental investigation that explores themes and ideas throughout a patchwork of people, sounds, and stories. But even that doesn't quite grasp what it actually is. It's really one you have to listen to understand. Number 8, Huberman Lab. So this is another podcast that kind of makes you feel cleverer every time you listen to it. And who doesn't want that? Huberman Lab is a podcast hosted by Andrew Huberman, a neuroscientist and tenured professor in the Department of Neurobiology at Stanford. Don't know much more about the guy than that, but what more do you need to know? He sounds clever. One thing I do know is that he's made numerous significant contributions to the fields of brain development, brain function, and even neuroplasticity. Whatever that is. And the podcast discusses just that, how our brain and its connections with the organs of our body control our perceptions and our health. Now, if you're like me and don't know much about the scientific world of brains, then don't worry, because he describes it in a very, very presentable and approachable manner. Number 9, Drifting Off with Joe Pera. Now, this entry is nothing like any of the other podcasts we mentioned on the list so far, because unlike the others that kind of want your attention, this one actually sort of wants you to fall asleep while you're listening to it. So if you're having trouble sleeping, or maybe struggle with something like insomnia, this could be for you. Joe Pera, if you're not familiar, is a character-based comedian with a wholesome image. His humor is very uplifting, never mean-spirited, and often talks in a very relaxing voice. Drifting Off with Joe Pera is also crafted by composer Ryan Dan. With the low-key jokes, immersive soundscapes, and relaxing phone conversations, Joe's narration and Ryan's sound design will help you completely unwind and drift off. If you've ever tried Headspace and their sort of sleepscapes or sleep music, it's a bit like that, but with a friend. You're going to sleep with a friend every night, and he's always there. No. Number 10, No Such Thing as a Fish. So if you live in the UK, no doubt you have heard of the comedy panel show QI. It's a BBC comedy TV panel show hosted by Stephen Fry and Sandy Tuxvig. The whole basis of the show was basically just comedians trying to guess facts and questions. But behind the scenes of the show, there's a whole team of people, or QI elves, who are coming up with these facts and finding out all this weird and wonderful stuff. No Such Thing as a Fish is a podcast hosted by 4 of these said researchers who share the most bizarre, extraordinary, and hilarious facts they've discovered over the last 7 days with us. Not only is it strange and bizarre, but it has that same sort of warm feeling QI has. It's so popular, it's actually now been developed into its own BBC 2 series. So kind of gone full circle in a way. Now, it's pretty much guaranteed we've upset you in some way. Maybe we've missed out one of your favorite podcasts. Maybe we missed out all of your favorite podcasts. If we have, I'm really sorry. But we'd love to know which podcast you are listening to right now. Head down into the comments below. Tell us all your favorite podcasts. We'd love to know. And while you're down there, you might as well hit that like button, click the subscribe button, and ring that bell. See you in the next one. Bye.